here in CICS right now we have a couple of research projects that I'm working on, mainly to do around my own research area deals with state non-state interactions. So looking mainly at traditional leaders, traditional leadership and the way they interact with the modern state, mainly in the Horn of Africa, but also in the Caribbean coast of Latin America. So the main research project we're working on right now is a project funded by DFID, and we're looking at poor Ethiopians' perceptions of justice and access to security. The interesting part about the research is that we're looking at it from both sides, not only what poor Ethiopians think about justice and security provision, but also what the providers think. So we're looking to see is there a disconnect between what the local police chief thinks are the main crime problems in the area and what the average person in the street thinks. We're also looking at prioritizing who people go to first as first instances, whether they go to a traditional leader, whether they go to the state system, and this kind of whole spectrum of stuff to do with traditional leadership and justice in the area. Well, it's actually it was a bit of a problem trying to design a research methodology for something that was so broad, because we wanted something that would be robust enough to encompass the entirety of Ethiopia, all the states, all the regional provinces and stuff like that. We also wanted something that went into enough depth at the provincial level that allowed you to say, well, this is a credible study of this area. You can actually take the results and do something with. So we designed a mixed method approach, which is it looks for both breadth and depth in the study. So we get our breadth by our selection of sample sites. And rather than using 1,001 enumeration areas or looking at something heavily statistically robust like that, we decided, because the study was focused on poor people's needs, and more than 92% of Ethiopians live on less than $2 a day, that where we sampled wasn't as important as who we sampled. So what we did was we picked a selection of 6 regional states in the province: Tigray in the far north, the Amhara states, the southern nations, nationalities and peoples region, Oromia, Afar, and also the capital Addis Ababa. And we looked at these in depth in them, and the depth we got from them was by looking at various sectors of the society. So rather than just interviewing the man in the street, we designed a questionnaire that allowed us to pick specific categories of people. So what we did was we went to the local university, to Addis Ababa University, and we got 8 young researchers, all master's level researchers. We gave them a crash course in what we thought was how we wanted the questionnaire to be administered, and we sent them out to the various areas. And the way they did it was that we broke up each region that we were going to by sectoral groups. So we needed to make sure they had captured all the vulnerable groups that we had classified them. So those were the elderly, women, the young, pastoral communities. In addition to that, we wanted them also to capture majoritarian communities, whether they be agricultural or whether they're sedentary farmers, depending on the area they were doing the research. So we had this very, very broad spread across Ethiopia, but in the areas that we'd select, we were able to go down to an incredible level of depth. And to top that off, we also made them do interviews with local government officials. So we also interviewed police chiefs, we interviewed the head of the federal police, we interviewed the Kebele administrators and the Orid administrators in the various zones that we looked at. It was a tough challenge to design this research methodology in such a way that it wouldn't gloss over the problems and gloss over the discrepancies that Ethiopians have amongst themselves. The last thing we wanted was to present a homogenized picture of this is Ethiopia, this is the Ethiopian man and woman in the street, and this is what they think. So with this research methodology that we designed here, we were able to get an incredible amount of breadth and depth, and I think that's what makes the study so useful coming out of it. It was commissioned by DFID jointly with the Ethiopian government because they're hoping to reform their security sector there. And most countries end up in the problem that they decide on security sector reform, or more correctly, they're pushed into security sector reform. They're not quite sure what to do with it. It doesn't necessarily reflect the agendas of the man on the street. These things are written more to be read by someone in Brussels or in London and have very little to do with national capitals, much less subnational capitals, subnational regions. So what we decided to do was start from where it should start. You start with what the people on the street think about the security sector. So therefore it's forming a baseline which other studies can be attached to, and which security sector reform, the agenda for it, can also be latched onto this. And so what it gives is an actual picture of, I think in total we had about 650 individual interviews, and we had over 1,000 people in focus groups. So you've got a pretty large section of the Ethiopian population there, reflecting both urban, rural, and semi-urban areas, men, women, the young, the old. You've got a very good spectrum across Ethiopia here, from which you can say concretely in these particular areas that we went to, they may not represent the entire country, but they do represent a good cross-section of the country. These are the major concerns. And from that you can take out all kinds of data. I mean, we're still going over data and pulling out new findings. Some of the interesting stuff has been, you find anomalies where you least expected them to be. Where we expected Addis Ababa to be a relatively easy place to do research, a city of close to 4 million people, very urban, it actually turned out to be much more difficult in some of the more remote areas, because people were so hypersensitive about political questions. We had no interference from the Ethiopian government in our research, but still people were very worried about doing interviews. We had more spoilt interviews in Addis Ababa than we did anywhere else. I remember doing one interview and someone actually leaving the interview place, halfway into it. As soon as you had so many of them that got wrapped up about 5 or 6 questions into it, in which people were just saying, I don't really like this line of questioning. Even though they'd been briefed as to what the research was about, they'd signed the informed consent form, their informed consent form. They had felt comfortable enough starting off when you did, the background questions, age, sex, and things like that. But once you started asking questions about other areas, people became very, very antsy about it, which was was something that we didn't expect. Another anomaly that I found, and this is perhaps to do with my bias coming from a tropical Amazonian country. I just love the desert, so anything that happens in the desert I find it always interesting. So in the Afar region there, the study looked at the 2 communities that live there, the indigenous Afar people and highlanders who would come from central Ethiopia for work or things like that, and the tensions there that they had. This is an area in which Ethiopian state presence has only relatively recently, made an impression. But one of the interesting things that we found there was that in times past, the Afar thought of themselves as islands onto the world. They dealt with their own communal problems, whether it be something to do over pastures or whether it's a security issue. Now they really look to the state to provide them with security. They feel that when something goes wrong, the old way with the Afar would have been to get their dula, their fighting stick, or their Kalashnikov, and go and deal with the problem themselves. Whereas now they really think their first port of call is the states. And they're demanding the same resources and same rights as other Ethiopians, rightfully so, but something that wasn't happening, say, 20, 30 years ago. It was really a law unto itself. It was sometimes, called bandit country in Ethiopia, the Afar areas. But that has totally changed as the Afar have become more absorbed into not only Ethiopian society, but also the market economy and also the new federal structures. They see this as something that they really own, and they want to be more involved with that. So that was an interesting find to see this both in the urban areas. There were anomalies thrown up for us, as well as in rural areas, and also discrepancies between male-female priorities in terms of security is actually not that different in Ethiopia, both in urban and rural areas. You find that in rural areas there's a lot more trust for state system, for the state security apparatus in the rural areas. The question that we have to look at now in our follow-on study is this preference, acceptance, trust in state security systems more so in the rural areas than in the urban areas? Is that a facet of an actual trust in the state system, or is it just because expectations are so low? So a 0.5 increase in service provision actually means a whole lot more to someone in a rural Kabyle than it does to someone in an urban one. Those are the kind of things that we'll probably be teasing out, I hope, for the next 2 or 3 years from this study here. I think we have a wealth of data. We had some incredible researchers who worked with us from Addis Ababa University. And I think the study will be both useful not only to practitioners, which is important, but really you want to design, the joy of designing a good piece of research is that it's useful to people on the ground. It's written in a way that they can understand it, something that they can read, and something that they can look at, see the holes and say, well, hold on a minute, you did this, you didn't do that, you didn't do this, I can fill these gaps. So researchers at Addis Ababa University and at other Ethiopian universities can look at our study and say, well, actually, I think if you had done this differently, you'd be able to get another bit of research or another set of finding, and they can go forward and take the research, continually evolve it like that, which I think is important for research.